Happy morning, dear students. I welcoming you all to this online learning. Previously, we have completed chapter 8 and today we start with the chapter 9, Locomotion and Movement. In this chapter, we are going to discuss about different types of movements, types of muscles, and about skeletal muscle and mechanism of muscle contraction. Have you ever wondered how a dancer performs intricate dance steps? Or how a swimmer skillfully does a butterfly stroke? The muscles of our body work simultaneously with one another and with the skeletal system to perform the various movements. Our muscles have two functions. One is to generate motion and other is to generate force. All these activities are controlled and coordinated by the skeletal, muscular and the nervous system. Movement of organism from one place to another in search of food, shelter, mate and to escape from predators is called locomotion. There are different types of movement in different types of animals. The different types of movements that occur in the cells of our body are amoeboid, ciliary, flagellar and muscular movement. Amoeboid movement. The cells such as macrophages exhibit amoeboid movement for engulfing the pathogens by pseudopodia. So the macrophages, they engulf the pathogens by producing their pseudopodia formed by streaming movement of the cytoplasm. Second is the ciliary movement. This type of movement occurs in the respiratory passages and genital tracts, which are lined by ciliated epithelium. You know very well about cilia. Cilia is a small hair-like structures that found around paramecium. So in paramecium, the movement of paramecium takes place with the help of this cilia. A small hair-like structure that helps to move the organism from one place to another place. Likewise, the ciliary movement present in our respiratory and genital tract helps in movement of certain substances. Flagellar movements. This type of movement occur in the cells which are having flagella or whip-like a motile organelle. Flagella is nothing but a long hair-like structures which you can see in euglena. The sperm cells show flagellar movement. You can able to see a sperm which moves towards the egg with the help of the flagellar movement. Muscular movement. The movement of hands, legs, jaws, tongue are caused by the contraction and relaxation of the muscles which are termed as the muscular movements. Then we move on to the types of muscles. Muscles are specialized tissues which are derived from the embryonic mesoderm. They are made up of cells called myocytes and constitute 40 to 50% of the body weight. The muscles are classified into three types, namely skeletal muscle, visceral muscle and cardiac muscles. Skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is attached to the bone by a bundle of collagen fiber known as tendons. So this tendons attaches the skeletal muscle with the bones. Each muscle is made up of bundles of muscle fibers called fascicle. Each muscle fiber contains hundreds to thousands of rod-like structures called myofibrils, and they run parallel to each other. The connective tissue covering the whole muscle is called as epimysium, and the covering around each fascicle is called as perimysium, and the muscle fiber that surrounds by the endomysium. They control the voluntary actions such as walking, running, swimming, writing. Hence they are termed as voluntary muscles. If you see the structure of skeletal muscle fiber, each muscle fiber is thin and elongated. Most of them taper at one or both ends. The muscle fiber has multiple oval nuclei just beneath its plasma membrane. It is called as sarcolemma. The cytoplasm of the muscle fiber is called as sarcoplasm. It contains glycosomes, myoglobin and sarcoplasmic reticulum. Myoglobin is a red-colored respiratory pigment of the muscle fiber. It is similar to that of hemoglobin and contains iron group that has affinity towards oxygen and serve as a reservoir of oxygen. Glycosomes are the granules of stored glycogen that provides glucose during the period of muscle fiber activity. Actin and myosin are muscle proteins present in the muscle fiber. Along the length of each myofibril, there are repeated series of dark and light bands. The dark bands, that is the A band, and the light band are called as I band, are perfectly aligned with one another. This arrangement gives the cell a striped appearance. Each dark band has a lighter region in its middle called H zone. Each H zone is bisected vertically by a dark line called M line. The light I bands also have a darker midline area called Z disc. The myofibril contains the contractile element, the sarcomere, which is the functional unit of skeletal muscle. A sarcomere is the region of myofibril between two successive Z discs. It contains a A band with a half I band at each end. Inside the sarcomere, two types of filaments are present, namely a thick and the thin filaments. Thick filaments extend the entire length of the A band, while the thin filaments extend across I band and partly into the A band. This invagination of sarcolemma forms transverse tubules and they penetrate into the junction between A and the I band. If you see the structure of the contractile protein, contraction of the muscles depends on the presence of contractile protein such as actin and myosin. The thick filament composed of the protein myosin. Each myosin molecule is made up of a monomer called meromyosin. The meromyosin has two regions, a globular head with a short arm and a tail. The short arm constitutes the heavy meromyosin and the tail portion forms light meromyosin. The head bears an actin binding site and an ATP binding site. It also contains ATPase enzyme that splits ATP to generate energy for the contraction of muscles. The thin filament is composed of two intertwined actin molecules. Actin has a polypeptide subunit called globular actin, that is G-actin, and the filamentous form F-actin. The thin filaments also contain several regulatory proteins like tropomyosin and troponin, which help in regulating the contraction of muscles along with actin and myosin. The study of muscles is called as myology. If you see the mechanism of muscle contraction, so how the muscle contracts, so what are the events that takes place in muscle contraction? Sliding filament theory in 1954 was given by Andrew F. Huxley and Rolf Nidger proposed the sliding filament theory. According to this theory, actin and myosin filaments slide on another in an energy requiring process resulting in muscle contraction. The contraction of muscle fiber is a remarkable process that helps in creating a force to move or to resist a load. The force which is created by the contracting muscle is called as muscle tension. Contraction is the creation of tension in the muscle, which is an active process, and relaxation is the release of tension created by contraction. Muscle fiber is initiated by a nerve impulse sensed by the central nervous system through a motor neuron. The junction between the motor neuron and the sarcolemma of the muscle fiber is called neuromuscular junction. What is meant by neuromuscular junction? The junction between the motor neuron and the sarcolemma of the muscle fiber is called as neuromuscular junction. So this mechanism of muscle contraction you can easily study with help of the schematic presentation of muscles. So here it is given. If you see the schematic representation of muscle contraction, Muscle contraction is initiated by the signals from the central nervous system, and then it releases acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junction. This causes action potential in the muscle fiber, and it triggers the release of calcium ion from sarcoplasmic reticulum. These calcium ions combine with the troponin and tropomyosin and uncovers the binding sites on actin and initiates contraction. Myosin binding sites on actin is exposed and myosin heads bind to actin. Myosin head execute a power stroke and actin filament slides towards the center of the sarcomere by contraction. Signal from the central nervous system stops and the calcium ions are pumped back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Tropomyosin masks the binding sites, filament pulled back to the original position that causes relaxation. So actin and myosin plays a very important role in muscle contraction. Okay, so for this mechanism of muscle contraction, you can easily write this schematic presentation only. And then what is meant by skeletal muscle glycogen analysis, SMGA? This is used to measure an athlete's sporting performance by taking muscle biopsies. It is a standard method to measure the muscle glycogen. Muscle glycogen provides the main source of energy during anaerobic exercises. Then we move on to the different types of skeletal muscle contraction. There are two primary types of muscle contraction. One is isotonic, another one is isometric. The types of contraction depends on the changes in the length and the tension of the muscle fibers at the time of its contraction. Isotonic. What is iso? Iso means same, ton means weight. In isotonic contraction, the length of the muscle changes but the tension remains constant. Here, the force produced is unchanged. Example for this is lifting the dumbbells and weightlifting. Second one is the isometric. Iso means same and metric means distance. So in isometric contraction, the length of the muscle does not change but the tension of the muscle changes. Here, the force produced is changed. Example, pushing against a wall and holding a heavy bag. So these are the examples of isometric contraction. What are the different types of skeletal muscle fibers? The muscle fibers can be classified on the basis of the rate of shortening, either fast or slow, and the way in which they produce the ATP needed for contraction, either oxidative or glycolytic. Fibers containing myosin with a high ATPase activity are classified as fast fibers, and with lower ATPase activity are classified as slow fibers. Fast fibers means ATP activity is more. Slow fiber means ATPase activity is less. Fibers that contain numerous mitochondria and have a high capacity for oxidative phosphorylation are classified as oxidative fibers. So the fibers which contain numerous mitochondria is called as oxidative fibers. Such fibers depend on blood flow to deliver oxygen and nutrients to the muscles. The oxidative fibers are termed as red muscle fibers. The fibers that contain few mitochondria but possess a high concentration of glycolytic enzymes and stores large amount of glycogen are called glycolytic fibers. So question will be asked like this, what is oxidative and glycolytic fiber? Oxidative fiber means mitochondria is more, whereas in glycolytic fiber the mitochondria is very few. The lack of myoglobin gives pale color to the fibers, so they are termed as white muscle fibers. What is myoglobin? Myoglobin is a pigment present in the muscles which is similar to that of hemoglobin. Right? Skeletal muscle fibers are further classified into three types based on these oxidative and glycolytic. They are slow oxidative fibers, fast oxidative fibers, and fast glycolytic fibers. Slow oxidative fibers have low rates of myosin ATP hydrolysis but have the ability to make large amount of ATP. These fibers are used for prolonged regular activities such as long distance swimming. Long distance runners have a high proportion of these fibers in their leg muscles. Fast oxidative fibers means they have high myosin ATPase activity and can make large amount of ATP. They are particularly suited for rapid actions. And fast glycolytic fibers have myosin ATPase activity but cannot make as much ATP as oxidative fibers because the source of ATP is glycolysis. These fibers are best suited for rapid intense actions such as short sprint at maximum speed. So these are the different types of skeletal muscle fibers. Next, we move on to the properties of skeletal muscles. The four major properties of skeletal muscles are excitability or irritability, contractility, conductivity, and elasticity. What is excitability? The ability to respond or contract and respond to chemical or electrical signals. So, due to chemical or electrical signals, the muscles contract is called as excitability. Contractility. The ability to shorten, which causes movement of structures to which the muscles are attached. That means they can contract. Third one is conductivity. Stimulus acting on one region of muscle fiber spreads to all parts of the muscle is known as conductivity. They conduct, that means they travel, they transport. Okay. Stimulus acting on one region of muscle fiber spreads to all parts of the muscle is known as conductivity. Last one is the elasticity. The ability to return to the original resting length after a muscle has been stretched. Elastic. Elastic means come back to its original position. Right? So these are the four major functions of skeletal muscles. Next, we move on to the skeletal system and its functions. The skeletal system is constituted by a framework of bones and cartilages. It is derived from the embryonic mesoderm. Muscles are attached to the bones by the means of tendons and provide necessary force required for the bones of the skeleton to operate as levers. There are three types of skeletal systems: hydrostatic skeleton, exoskeleton, and endoskeleton. Hydrostatic skeleton, which is found in the soft body invertebrates. It is a fluid-filled cavity encircled by muscles. Example for this is earthworm. So you have already know about that. Earthworm has two types of muscles. One is longitudinal muscles, another one is the circular muscles. Okay, with the help of these muscles, it can move from one place to another place. So this acts as a hydrostatic skeleton. Next is the exoskeleton, which is found in invertebrates. It is a rigid, hard case present outside the body of an animal. Exo means outside. Example for this is cockroach. Endoskeleton, endona, inside, which is found inside the body of vertebrates. It is composed of bones and cartilages, which is surrounded by muscles. So in human being, the skeletal system is made up of 206 bones and cartilages. It is grouped into two principal divisions, that is the axial skeleton and appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton consists of 80 bones and the appendicular skeleton consists of 126 bones. Before going into that topic, we should know about the functions of skeletal system. So what are the main functions of skeletal system? It gives support. It forms a rigid framework and support the weight of the body against gravity. Second one is the shape. It provides and maintains the shape of the body. Third one is the protection. It protects the delicate internal organs of the body. And fourth one, it acts as a reservoir. That means it stores minerals such as calcium and phosphate. Fat is stored in yellow bone marrow and represents a source of stored energy for the body. Next is the locomotion. It acts as a lever along which the muscles attach to it, which helps to move from one place to another place. It gives strength. It can withstand heavy weight and absorbs mechanical shock. And last one, it acts as a hematopoietic tissue. What is hematopoiesis? Red blood cells and the white blood cells are produced in the bone marrow. Okay, so that is called as a hematopoietic. So these RBC and WBC are produced in the bone marrow of the ribs, spongy bones of vertebrates and extremities of long bones. So these are the various functions of skeletal system. Let me repeat. It gives support, shape, protection. It acts as a reservoir. It helps in locomotion. It gives strength and it acts as a hematopoietic tissue. Right? Next we move on axial skeleton. Axial skeleton forms the main axis of the body. It consists of skull, hyoid bone, vertebral column and thoracic cage. We will discuss one by one. First one is the skull. The skull is composed of two sets of bones, the cranial and the facial bones. It consists of 22 bones, of which 8 are cranial bones and 14 are facial bones. So there are 8 cranial and 14 facial bones. The cranial bones forms the hard outer protective covering of the brain and is called as brain box. The capacity of the cranium is 1500 centimeter cube. These bones are joined by sutures which are immovable. So brain box இருக்கக்கூடிய bones எல்லாம் immovable joints நால செய்யப்பட்டது. The cranial bones are a paired parietal, paired temporal and individual bones such as frontal, sphenoid, occipital and ethmoid. A large hole in the temporal bone is called as the external auditory meatus. Temporal means it's nothing but the ear bone. So in the facial bones, maxilla, zygomatic, palatine, lacrimal, nasal or paired, whereas mandible or the lower jaw and the vomer or the unpaired bones. They form a front part of the skull. A single U-shaped bone, that is the hyoid bone, which is present at the base of the buccal cavity. So hyoid bone is the buccal cavity ki irukkum. It is the only bone without any joint. Each middle ear consists of 3 tiny bones, malleus, incus and stapes, which is collectively called as ear ossicles. The upper jaw is formed of maxilla and the lower jaw is called as mandible. The upper jaw is fused with the cranium and it is immovable, and the lower jaw is connected to the cranium by the muscles and it is movable. The most prominent opening of the skull are the orbits. Orbits is nothing but eye, okay, and the nasal cavity. Foramen magnum is a large opening found at the posterior base of the skull, through which the medulla oblongata of the brain descends down the spinal cord. Okay, that's all about skull. You have to know how many facial bones, cranial bones are there. That's meant by hyoid bone. Okay, what is foramen magnum, etc. Next one is the vertebral column. Vertebral column is also called as backbone and it consists of 33 serially arranged vertebrae which are interconnected by a cartilage known as intervertebral disc. Each vertebrae is connected by a disc that is called as intervertebral disc. The vertebral column extends from the base of the skull to the pelvis and forms the main framework of the trunk. The vertebral column has 5 major regions: cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacrum and coccyx. Each vertebra has a central hollow portion, the neural canal through which the spinal cord passes. The first vertebrae is called as atlas and the second vertebrae is called as axis. Atlas is articulated with the occipital condyles. Occipital is nothing but it is the posteriormost bone of the skull. Okay, this axis is attached to that. The vertebral column protects the spinal cord, supports the head and serve as a point of attachment of the ribs and the musculature of the back. Next one is the sternum, chest bone. Sternum is a flat bone on the mid-ventral line of the thorax. It provides space for the attachment of thoracic ribs and abdominal muscles. Sternum is nothing but and the rib cage in the center bone of the pattaya. That is the sternum. And next is the rib cage. There are 12 parts of ribs. Each rib is a thin flat bone attached dorsally to the vertebral column and ventrally to the sternum. பின்னாடி பார்த்தோன்னா vertebral column attach ஆயிருக்கும், frontல sternumல attach ஆயிருக்கும். It looks like a cage. You can see in this picture. It has two articulation surfaces on its dorsal end, hence it is bicephalic. The first 7 pairs of the ribs are called as true ribs. Dorsally, they are attached to the thoracic vertebrae and ventrally, they are connected to the sternum with the help of hyaline cartilage. So, which cartilage connects this? Hyaline cartilage. The 8th, 9th and the 10th pairs of the ribs do not articulate directly with the sternum but joined with the cartilaginous part of the 7th rib. Hence, they are called as false ribs. The last two vertebrae, 11th and the 12th pairs of ribs are not connected ventrally. Therefore, they are called as floating ribs. 3 types of ribs: true ribs, false ribs and floating ribs. The thoracic vertebrae, ribs and sternum together forms the rib cage. This rib cage protects the lung, heart, liver and also plays a role in breathing.